here. Tell you a little bit about myself while we're getting this screen ready. My name's Tim Glantz. I am the owner of Old Grouch's Military Surplus, which is about 3 miles away from here. I know a lot of you have been in there. I recognize a lot of you. I've got I'm a ham radio operator, been a ham radio operator about 15 years. My call sign is actually W4WTF. The FCC actually gave me that when I asked for it. And I'm also an Army Reservist. I'm a Chief Warrant Officer 3 in the Army Reserve. Do mostly logistical stuff, but communications also comes into play there. Give me 1 second while I get this set up. All right. Communications. What is communications? It basically is transfer of information. We're communicating right now. Communications, excuse me, I've been up since 3 o'clock. Communications can be one way or two way. You can glean a lot just from listening. You usually don't get a lot just from talking, but you can get a lot just from listening. And for prep communications, survival communications, you need a plan. And in your communication plan, there's several things you're going to have. What do you want to know? What do you want to learn? Think about that. Think about what knowledge is going to be important to you when it comes time and what is not going to be important. And have a plan to filter out the unimportant stuff, because you can sit there and just absorb information all day long, but if it's not important to you, you've wasted your time. What do you want to say? Who are you going to need to say it to? Who do you want to listen to? And we'll get into more on that later. It comes into filtering it. Who do you want to talk to? It's not always the same as who you want to listen to. I'll give you an example. If you've got a scanner and there's, say, civil unrest in your area, you can listen to the police and know what's going on, but you don't necessarily want to pick up a radio and talk to them. In fact, they're probably going to get pretty irritated if you start talking to them on their radio bands. And in this presentation, I can't teach you everything you need to know to communicate. Just can't. I'm going to give you a general outline, general ideas, and then you can take from that and start making your plan. You can say, okay, I need to look more into this. I need to learn more about that. And we will, that's where you build from. And you can't build alone. You need to talk to everybody else that you're going to need to talk to, and everybody else you're going to want to communicate with, and make sure you're on the same page. Because if you're not, then it's not going to work. The first thing I want to go over is local communications. And that's your local neighborhood, local to you, within 1 to 3 miles. How many of you have neighbors that you're going to want to be able to keep in touch with when the phones aren't working? How many of you have people in the same town that you're going to want to be able to keep in touch with? It's important. And you might learn when the chips are down that, hey, these guys 2 houses down really are good ones, and I want to keep in touch with them. You need to have a plan for that. It should be your main priority, because what's closest to you is what's most important. It's what impacts you the most, and it's what's going to have the most immediate effect on everything you do. And 2 key things you're going to be using there. You can either use radios or phones. And you use your regular landline phone. You can use your military surplus field phones. I'll talk a little bit more about those. And you can use modified phones. I'll talk about how to modify your phone so you can pick up your phone in your house, it'll ring in your neighbor's house, and you're not going through the phone company. All that is pretty important stuff to know. Local radio communications. How many of you have got the little FRS radios like you get at Walmart or Sam's Club or someplace like that? You've got limited power. You've got limited frequencies on them. You know what the frequencies are. You can go on the internet and figure out exactly what those frequencies are. And guess what? I've got a scanner and I've got every one of those frequencies in it. If you're talking on it, I'm listening. I'll tell you, every game warden in the state of North Carolina has probably got a scanner in his vehicle listening to those frequencies because the poachers use them. Poachers think they're outsmarting them. They're not. Whenever you pick something like that where the frequencies are known, you're going to have to assume people are listening. There are, some of them have these things called privacy codes. That's a gimmick. There's no privacy from a privacy code. All a privacy code is a code in there that keeps you from hearing other people. It gives them privacy because you can't hear them. Doesn't give you any privacy because on my scanner, I'm going to hear everything. And you've got those little antennas on those radios by design because the FCC doesn't want them transmitting very far. My scanner's got a big antenna. I can hear your radio further than two of those radios can talk to each other. So if you're coming around my house talking on the radios, and I'm going to hear you. And I'm going to know if you're up to no good. And if people that are up to no good, that are smart enough know how to do it, and they're coming through your neighborhood and you're using those radios, they're going to know what you're up to. So the security aspect of this is something to seriously consider. Another thing, if you're in a densely populated area, take those radios sometime and go to Disney World or an air show. You will have so many people using them and so many kids running around hitting buttons and having fun that they'll be useless. And it's something to think about how many of those radios might be floating around your area that when times are tough, people are going to dig out. And that radio channel that you've been able to use with your family for the last 3 years, suddenly there's 25 other people trying to use it all at the same time. Get really crowded really fast. There's a thing called MURS radio, multiple use radio service. It's on VHF. It'll give slightly better range. There are a lot fewer radio options. It's a lot less known. It does not require a license, which is an advantage of it. You can hand them out to people. But the same thing. You know the frequencies. They're in my scanner. And it's funny because that is a service that's been converted over from other things. So sometimes you'll have a MURS radio, you go through and you're driving down the road and suddenly you're hearing the Taco Bell drive-through. It's an option out there. There are purpose-made MURS radios. You can also buy surplus commercial radios that police departments are getting rid of. And a lot of them have had to recently get rid of their radios because the FCC mandated the switch to what's called narrowband. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And now all these radios are on the market dirt cheap. And they're rugged, public safety grade radios that are made for police to use and firefighters to take into burning buildings. And they're on eBay and other places dirt cheap. And it takes some little bit of specialized equipment to program them, but a lot of these eBay sellers will program them for you. So if you say, hey, I want them on these MURS frequencies, they'll do them for you. You do that, you're coming up with a much better package than the FRS radios. Your ham radio. You're going to get sick of hearing me talk about ham radio by the time I'm done with this presentation because I'm going to talk about it a lot. It gives you the most options. Because unlike any other radio service, ham radio is not limited to specific predesignated channels. Hams don't tune to channel 2 or channel 5. They tune to 146.52 megahertz. And if that's busy, they go to 146.55 and wherever they want to be. That gives you several things. It's an almost limitless possibility for frequencies. That makes it harder for people to come through and listen to you. I can't sit there and put in my scanner every possible ham radio frequency that it could pick up. It doesn't have enough channels. They don't make a scanner that has enough channels. And if they did, it would take so long to scan through, you'd never hear anything. There are a lot more radios out there available. The radios that are out there for ham have a lot more power options. You can power them not just from AA batteries or the rechargeables, but they all have an external power jack where you can plug them into 12 volts, into your cigarette lighter, into a battery powered by a solar panel. If you go on and look at any of the ham radio forums, there are thousands of ideas of how hams have rigged up emergency power for their radios. It's a huge, huge, huge advantage. Now, there's a disadvantage. You've got to be licensed. And that means everybody you want to talk to needs to be licensed. So you got to get motivated and get it done. But it is my favorite option by far. And the last one I'm going to talk about, I just started playing with some of these, and I've talked to some people here who have used them. I'm really impressed. Motorola makes a series of radios called the DTRs. That's picture one up there. That radio runs on 900 megahertz. It'll have a range of, realistically, from 3/4 of a mile to 3 miles, depending on terrain. But it runs on 900 megahertz doing what's called spread spectrum. where it hops frequency hundreds of times a second. What that means is nobody's going to intercept it. If I've got a pair of DTR radios here, I guarantee you there's nobody in Western North Carolina that's got the ability to intercept that radio. There are some people, I'm sure, in the government that do, but you would have to really draw attention to yourself for them to pull that limited resource to do it. And it's just a thing that was done by accident. Motorola wanted to work within the FCC rules to have as many channels as possible on these radios, and they did this, and as an accident of that, nobody can listen. Unless somebody actually knows exactly what you programmed into your radio to get that sequence where it hops, or they get a hold of one of your radios, they can't hear it. There are limited radio options. Like I said, it's a Motorola. You can only get them from Motorola. Anybody that's messed with radios knows that when you put that little Motorola batwing on it, you're pricing it up there. It's going to be expensive. Most of those start out about $250 a piece. So you can see if you're outfitting 4 or 5 people, it can get expensive pretty fast. But if you want the most secure option that can't be listened to, short of spending thousands upon thousands of dollars, your Motorola DTR series really is it. Yes? Okay, the question is about jamming the ham radio signals. The military does have the ability to jam some radio frequencies, but one of the things I mentioned about ham is you have this whole breadth of frequencies available, and shutting it all down would be nearly impossible. If they jam one frequency, you just go to another, you go to another, you go to another, and if you're worried about that and you've got friends that you know you're going to be communicating, you've got a plan. Okay, if I can't get through you on this frequency, we're going to this one. Can't get through on this one, we're going to this one. And there's some of the ham bands that are more obscure that aren't used a lot that nobody pays attention to. So it would take so much effort that would be virtually impossible. They can make it more difficult, but you can't shut it down. That's one of the reasons why ham radio operators provide backup communications for state, local, and federal government communications, because when all their government systems fail, the ham radio stuff is still working. Because the guys that usually operate those radios, say you go up to your Haywood County EOC, those guys are great, they're professionals. Good dispatchers, they can do it. But they know they turn the radio on, they push to talk, they release to listen. They don't know what makes the radio tick, except for 2 or 3 guys that are techs. The hams know what makes the radio tick, they can keep it on the air, go around the obstacles. Talk about phones a little bit. Your landline phone. Some of you may have noticed my phone works, my landline phone works when the power's out. That is if you don't have a cordless. That is an actual hardwired into the wall phone. And that is because your phone company switches have backup power. Most of them have battery banks. Some of them have generators, some have a mix. And the power companies have generators on trailers they will take if the batteries are going to go down. But they don't have enough for everything. So if you have widespread power outages, after 1 to 5 days, those landlines that were still working are going to stop working, unless they're ones that get the priority. Sometimes the phone switches can fail where you can only call in your area code or in your local number. Like if you're in Clyde, North Carolina, 627 prefix, sometimes the switches will fail where that local switch is working, they can't get out. So you can dial any other 627 number, but you can't dial anywhere else. The phone system with its copper lines is pretty redundant. It is more reliable than a lot of other systems, more reliable than the cell phone network in a lot of ways. But that backup power, once again, is limited. It's only going to go so many days. And one of the great limiting factors there, if you're in an area that's hot, they've got to have air conditioning. So when the air conditioners go out, even if they got power to it, stuff starts going bad fast. Yeah. Yep.
And that's what, but you're saying that eventually they just die off in the event of a disaster.
Yeah. What he said was the phones after this hurricane worked, but like he said, it takes a lot of power to run an air conditioner. And it's true, they will take them down when they start fixing things, because especially when they start doing a lot of power line work. You can hook phones together with what's called a ring down device. And I've got the website there for Ramsey Electronics who makes it. It's about $100. You hook two regular landline phones together, and when you pick up the phone on one, it rings on the other end. Doesn't go through any phone company switches or everything else. You do have to have power to that, and so you will need a battery system that will run it. If you're going to run it long-term off-grid, it's going to have to be solar-powered, because it does consume batteries at a pretty good rate. There is an expansion for it for about another $100 to let you put about 4 of them together. You could have basically a party line for your neighborhood. So if you've got your neighbors on board and you're saying, hey, if we want to be able to get each other in a hurry, pick up a phone, they all ring, that's an option for you. Another option out there are the military field phones. I got a picture of a German field phone up there, and that's just because I happen to sell the German field phones. I'm a surplus dealer, and you can't get American ones right now, but I'm able to get the Germans, and I actually like them a little better. They're ruggedized. There's nothing solid state in them. That German phone is basically the World War II design they made through the 90s. EMP, solar flares, none of that will hurt it. They're hardwired together, so you can't intercept it. Unless somebody comes in and actually taps into that wire, that tiny wire you've run between homes, you cannot listen to it. And they've got D batteries in them, but the D batteries are only used when you're actually talking and pushing the button, so D batteries will last months in them, just 2 D batteries. You get some of those, some rechargeable D batteries and a solar charger, and you can have communications. Say you've got a homestead where you've got a barn and want to put something down by your entrance to your gate, or you've got a neighborhood where you've got some like-minded neighbors or any of that stuff. You can have a system like that's rugged and works really well. You can get the American field phones. There's German ones out there. There's Czech. And you just wire them together. You crank it. It's got a hand crank generator basically that runs a magneto. And when you crank it, they all ring. You can have 2 on a line. You can have 4 on a line, as many as you want. And you run the wires up to 22 miles apart. I'm not brave enough to run 22 miles of wire anywhere, but the military does it on a regular basis. And the military still uses field phones, even to this day, because of that reason. You can run them out to an observation post, and they're not transmitting any radio waves that can be intercepted. So you know it, and the batteries last long, so nobody's got a battery going dead in the middle of the night where they got problems. That's another option to consider when you're doing your local communications plan is, how long are my batteries going to last? Electronics devices all consume power, and they consume especially radios at a really good rate, because radios are always listening, always receiving. That receiver's always on. Yeah, he asked if when you crank the crank, if they all ring. If you've run it up into a hot loop with more than 2 of the field phones on a net, yeah, they will all ring. So if you've got 5 of them on there in 5 houses, you might want to do like the old party line system. It used to be, in rural areas where you had different rings for different people. So you ring it 3 times, that means, hey, you pick up in this house. Or you ring it 4 times this one. Or one long ring means, hey, everybody pick up, I've got something important. But yeah, that's the way that works. Is when you hook it together, you crank it, they all ring. On the bright side, you can also fish with that thing. You throw the wires in the water and crank it, and the fish will come up. I'm sorry? The field phones? In my shop, we got them for $49.50. And I'm not trying to do a sales pitch here, but actually we got a bunch out there. If you just go out to where the vendors are on the bottom floor, that one out there going to the back, you'll see us there. And I'll let you lay hands on them and play with them, and we can show them everything to you. No wire right now. You know how the surplus business, I've either got wire or phones, and I've never got them both at the same time. But the wire, it's any 2-conductor wire can be used. So you can use, I've even used surplus computer Cat5 cable, just pick 2 of the conductors and run it, speaker wire, any kind of 2-conductor wire can be used. Now I did have somebody ask me, hey, can I climb up and, if things are bad and the phone grid's down and it's not coming back up, can I climb up and hook into the phone lines? If you know what you're doing. But if you've ever seen inside a phone cable on a power pole, there are thousands of wires in there. And you got to be able to find the right ones. And to be honest, Since I don't know what anybody down the line is doing or putting in there, or if there's power lines that have fallen down, and I don't know who's got generators hooked in the wrong way that are backfeeding, I'm not climbing a power pole when things are bad. Not unless I know that it's been cut off on both ends where there's no chance that, something's going to run in that I don't want running in. Oops. When you're making your plan, here's what you need to look at when you're doing your local communications plan. The distance and number of stations needed. Who am I going to need to talk to? Are they going to be in one place in a home? Or are they going to be on foot? The answer is probably some of both. Ability of neighbors or others to operate equipment. If you're taking a radio down, do you want to have a radio at your elderly grandmother's house who doesn't even have a cell phone? You want something that's very simple. Push to talk, release to listen, on and off. Because if it's too complicated, people aren't going to use it, or they're not going to be able to operate it efficiently. Willingness too. If people don't want to learn, there's some people that don't want to learn. Battery consumption, that's a big one. Batteries always go faster than you think. Ask anybody that's gone out in the woods having to run stuff off of batteries if they had enough batteries, and it's usually they didn't. Alternative power sources. Solar panels powering deep cycle batteries. All my ham rigs are powered off deep cycle batteries with solar panel. They're off grid 24/7. So it's not even a blip to me if anything goes down. They're going to run just the same. So you need to look at, can I hook external power to this and run it? Can I run this charger off external power efficiently? If it's a radio that needs to be charged. Your security. Like I said, some things can be really easy to listen to. Your FRS radios, I guarantee you somebody's going to be listening when times are bad as soon as you key it up. Somebody may, I've got it in my scanner. I don't listen every day because I don't feel like hearing the kids running around the neighborhood, but, if I need to, I can just hit one button and it enables that bank again. He said, how hard is it to triangulate? On those radios, pretty easy. In fact, the local ham radio club here, I don't think we're still doing it anymore. They used to do what they called Fox Sense, where somebody would go out, key the transmitter, and everybody would go out for fun and try to find them. And that was hobbyist, and we usually did it pretty quick. If you've got the pros doing it, they'll be right on you. The biggest things there is lower power, the harder it is to hear. But if somebody's got something up in the air, low power won't make a difference. There's a lot of Taliban guys who learned that the hard way. Mixed methods usually work best. There's no right answer. You can't say, well, this telephone ring down is all I'm going to need. You can't say these handheld radios are all I'm going to need. You're probably going to need a mix of them. Maybe you want the field phones connected to houses in your area with your neighbors, but you want a couple of ham radios or the Motorola DTRs for when you're out walking around and checking on things. Or when somebody's got to leave and go somewhere so they can call back to somebody that's next to a field phone so they can relay a message. It's all about getting the message through. Multiple methods. Your regional communications. And by the way, this is not a specific thing that anybody says, local, regional, long distance. This is how I break it down myself to try to make it easy to understand. That's within 2 to 50 miles. Your local town, your county. It's going to be primarily radio traffic. You're not going to want to run phone wires that far for anything hardwired unless you've got the chance to run it way ahead of time. But then you're crossing roads, you're crossing other people's property and everything. So trying to run wire is going to be really difficult. 70 to 95% of your regional communications that you're going to need to do is going to be listening. Excuse me. Listening, learning what's going on in your area. And your biggest things are going to be ham radio, CB radio, and your scanners. Your ham radio. With modest equipment, you can talk 2 to 50 miles in the flatlands. If you're here in the mountains and you're at high elevation, longer. Up to 150 miles plus with the repeaters. Some ham radio repeaters. Now, before I get ahead of myself, a repeater is basically a radio station that's up at a high location or on a high tower, and it's going to receive and rebroadcast your transmissions to extend the range. It's what the police departments and everybody use. Ham radio, there are tens of thousands of ham repeaters already up and working, free for everybody to use across the country if you get a license. A lot of them have emergency backup power. Some of them are totally off grid, and some of them are right on the grid, and as soon as the grid goes down, they're down. We've got a really good one locally here on Mount Mitchell. I could step outside with my handheld ham radio and talk to somebody in Charlotte and somebody in Knoxville at the same time. That's an amazing tool, and it's free to use. A lot of emergency traffic will be passed via ham radio when other systems fail. If you go into Buncombe County EOC, it's been years since I've been in there with the ham club, but right outside the 911 dispatchers, there was a room full of ham radios. And stuff will be passed there. They've done all sorts of drills with ham operators, passing traffic after a disaster between hospitals and a disaster site. And not only that, but the ham operators will get on the air and spread information to each other, whatever's relevant. Hey, I just learned this. Hey, I just learned that. Even in poor weather, if there's a bad storm, they'll be passing weather reports through. I live about 45 minutes when traffic's nice away from my store. And when weather's bad, I get on and listen to the hams. I listen to hams and scanners. And that helps me find my way home that's not blocked when there's bad snow. And at least 2 nights, it saved me from staying overnight in my truck on I-40 or I-26 when traffic got snarled. Just listening to what they had to say. Your ham operators will pass traffic in relay, so that if I need to talk to somebody, say in Murphy, my VHF ham radio is not going to reach him. But I can reach a guy in Jackson County. He can reach a guy in Macon County. He can reach a guy in Murphy. And they'll practice that. Hams practice that, and they'll do it, and they'll pass the traffic all the way through. And even if it's somebody that's not a ham, they'll get that message to the closest ham who's on the air, and he'll do what he can to get it to them. So maybe they get it to somebody that's 3 miles down the road, and he writes it on a notepad, and it gets there. And this is actually even done still, called a radiogram. And hams will still practice doing it, so it's available in emergencies, and you can send a radiogram to somebody in California. Get on the air, pass it to one station, he'll pass it to another, and sooner or later it'll either end up delivered by hand or to his mailbox or even called and read to him. So there's a lot of redundancy there. Hams practice for when things aren't working. I know the local club here used to do a simplex net, I think they still do, where they would, instead of talking through the repeater, they'd say, hey, the repeater's down today, let's see if we can still talk. Just a mini drill. Half for fun, to test their equipment, half to say, hey, let's see if we can do it so when times are bad we can do it. You're limited in who you talk to the licensed ham and those with equipment. And it's a smaller pool of people to talk to. But it's also a trained pool of people. It's a pool of people who have been somewhat vetted because you know their call signs, you know them locally, and you know who they are. So they're going to have reliable information. If this is the same guy you've talked to on the radio, every week, he's not going to get on and give you bad information or make things up or, something even worse. He's going to be out there and try to be reliable. You can't just buy and not learn to use it and practice with it and expect it to work. You can't do it. I know a lot of people say, I'm going to get this ham radio and I'm not going to do anything with it, I'm going to put it back. That's like saying, I'm going to buy a gun to protect myself, but I'm never going to fire it and learn to use it. Or I'm going to buy a bunch of seeds, but I've never planted a garden and I expect to feed myself. I've seen people try that, and what they end up with the first time is they didn't learn any lessons, so their crops fail. If you're going to use ham radio, you have to get your license, and you don't have to live it, you don't have to do it, but every once in a while, at least once a month, get on and spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes talking to somebody on the radio. Go to a few club meetings. The hams do every year in June a thing called Field Day. It's a big emergency drill. All across the country, every ham radio club, group, and everybody goes out and sets up, and it operates off-grid, emergency power only, usually out in the middle of a field in tents, to see how many other stations they can talk to. And it's just a practice drill to keep the skills sharp, so if everything fails, hey, it's just like Field Day. And they make it a social event too. You have a barbecue and a cookout, and everybody has fun. But I think the local club here had over 1,000 contacts in 24 hours. Emergency equipment set up in tents in a parking lot. And you have to practice with it. If you haven't done that, when times are tough, it's going to be harder. And that's not the time to learn. Yes? He's asking, is there any detriment to having a ham license?